Have you ever wondered why silence unsettles a man more than any argument ever could? Why the absence of words speaks louder than the sharpest rebuke? A woman's silence, according to Carl Jung's insights into the unconscious, is not emptiness, but presence. It is a mirror held up to the masculine psyche, forcing him to confront what he cannot control, what he cannot immediately fix, and what he cannot escape. Silence, in its rawest form, strips away the noise of ego and leaves the man alone with his own shadow. When a woman withdraws her voice, she awakens the man's deepest anxieties. His first instinct is to interpret silence as punishment, as if her quiet has become a sentence passed upon his worth. In truth, her silence is rarely about him. It is about herself, about the sacred reclamation of space. But he feels it as abandonment, as rejection, as the vanishing of the feminine light that once validated his ego. A man may posture strength, but silence touches the wound beneath the armor, the wound of invisibility, the wound of being unchosen. Psychology teaches us that men are conditioned to seek affirmation from external recognition, conquest, success, the approval of others. When the feminine presence goes still, that external mirror disappears, and the man is left confronting the void within. This is why silence feels like a riddle he cannot solve. The more he tries to interpret it, the more his thoughts spiral. Obsession begins not in words, but in the spaces between them. Silence is the echo of what has not been said, and to the male psyche it is unbearable precisely because it awakens projection. Carl Jung called it the anima, the inner feminine that lives within every man. When a woman goes silent, she unknowingly activates this archetype, and the man begins to wrestle not just with her absence, but with his own buried longing. Suddenly, he is confronted with the unlived parts of himself. Tenderness, vulnerability, dependence. He begins to fear that he is losing her, but beneath that fear lies something deeper, the terror of losing connection to his own soul. You may not realize it, but your silence is more powerful than your words. It is not passive. It is active. It carries the weight of the unsaid, the sharpness of the unseen. Men often misinterpret it as indifference, yet it is rarely indifference. It is self-preservation. It is dignity. It is the refusal to bleed out in endless explanations. And when you withdraw into silence, he senses it in his body, before he understands it in his mind. The tension builds in him like an unplayed note in a symphony, unresolved and aching for release. Some men respond with anger. They cannot tolerate the unknown, so they lash out to force a reaction. Others collapse inward, replaying every moment, every word, searching for the trigger that led to this silence. And then there are those who become consumed, haunted by the quiet, unable to sleep, unable to find peace. They imagine conversations that never happened, arguments that never were. They obsess not because they love more deeply, but because they cannot tolerate the loss of control. Silence, in this way, reveals the truth. The woman's quiet exposes the man's fragility. The Stoic philosophers understood this well. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that external events are not what disturb us. It is our judgment about them. When a woman goes silent, the man's suffering does not come from her quiet, but from what his mind constructs within it. He fills the void with fears of betrayal, with regret, with fantasies of her slipping away into another man's arms. The silence is not her weapon, but his own imagination turned against him. And yet, in this suffering, there lies potential for the man willing to look within. Silence is the beginning of transformation. He begins to see that his dependency on her words, her presence, Her validation is a mirror of his own unhealed wounds. He realizes that the obsession is not with her silence, but with the emptiness inside himself that her silence makes visible. Carl Jung called this confrontation with the shadow a descent into the parts of the psyche one would rather avoid. And yet only by facing this darkness can growth occur. But here lies the paradox. While silence can torment the man, it also elevates the woman. Her refusal to explain, to beg, to justify, is a reclamation of power. It is the embodiment of the archetypal feminine mystery, the understanding that true allure does not come from endless giving, but from the disciplined withholding of energy. A silent woman is not weak. She is untouchable, like the moon hidden behind clouds, still luminous though unseen. So if you, as a woman, have ever wondered what a man thinks when you go silent, know this: he thinks of you far more than when you speak. Your silence becomes his riddle, his punishment, his obsession, his mirror. And whether he grows or collapses depends not on you, but on whether he dares to confront what your silence has awakened in him. The silence stretches like an endless corridor, and the man begins to walk it alone. At first he pretends it does not matter. He tells himself she is simply moody, that she will return when she is ready. But as hours turn to days, the silence grows heavier, pressing on him with the weight of his own neglected conscience. He senses that something has shifted, though he cannot name it. It is in the way she no longer explains herself, the way she no longer feeds his need for certainty. Her absence of words becomes louder than any storm of accusation. This is where the male psyche begins to unravel. Jung spoke often of the shadow, the parts of the self we reject, deny, or bury. In her silence, a woman awakens that shadow within a man. He begins to see himself as he fears he truly is: unworthy, replaceable, inadequate. Her refusal to engage dismantles his illusions of control. The ego, which thrives on constant recognition, finds nothing to grip, and so it trembles. Silence becomes the battlefield where his self-image fights for survival. You may not realize it, but your quiet is a kind of alchemy. Words are easy. They soothe, they explain. They keep the fragile masculine ego intact. Silence, however, is uncompromising. It forces him to meet the parts of himself he would rather drown in distraction. Without your words to anchor him, he drifts into the ocean of his own subconscious. There he meets his projections, memories of being left, fears of abandonment, the hidden rage of feeling unseen. The Stoics would remind him that this suffering is a teacher. Epictetus wrote that it is not what happens to us that hurts, but our interpretation of it. When you, as a woman, withdraw into silence, you do not harm him directly. You simply remove the constant reassurance his ego depends upon. It is his interpretation, his fear of what your quiet might mean, that eats at him. And in that torment, he stands at a crossroads, descend deeper into obsession or rise toward self-examination. For many men, the first path is chosen. They circle endlessly around your silence, replaying old conversations, imagining what they could have said differently. They analyze every detail, every gesture, searching for clues. Obsession thrives in the vacuum. The more he cannot reach you, the more your absence grows larger in his mind. He thinks of you at night when sleep will not come. He wonders if you have already forgotten him, if your silence is the language of detachment or of secret longing. The mystery drives him mad, because the masculine spirit is built to solve problems, and silence is a riddle without a solution. But some men, though fewer, begin to awaken under the pressure. They realize that the turmoil they feel is not born from the woman, but from themselves. In her silence, they recognize the hunger they carry for external validation, the wound of never feeling enough. Jung would call this an encounter with the anima, the feminine within that they have long ignored. Instead of chasing the woman, they begin to turn inward, asking, why does her silence cut so deeply? What is it within me that cannot bear being unseen? And in those questions, individuation begins, the slow, painful process of becoming whole. You see, silence is not merely the absence of sound. It is a presence. It is an energy that demands respect. To a man, it is a mirror, showing him either the cracks in his armor or the strength of his inner world. If he has built his worth upon conquest, flattery, and control, your silence will break him. But if he has cultivated self-awareness, he will see in your silence not an enemy, but a lesson. And yet, for the woman, silence is never simply about him. It is an act of survival. It is the reclaiming of power drained by endless explanation. It is the moment she decides her energy is too sacred to be squandered in futile words. Silence is the feminine form of detachment, the quiet refusal to perform for validation. It is not weakness, it is strength refined into stillness. And in that stillness, the woman remembers her own worth, independent of whether the man understands it or not. For the man, however, the silence continues to echo. He thinks of what he has lost, of what he failed to protect. He imagines her absence as permanent, though he secretly hopes it is temporary. He wonders whether she is punishing him or freeing herself. He cannot know. That is the torment. And so he stands suspended in uncertainty, unable to move forward, unable to return to what once was. The silence becomes a teacher to them both. For her it is liberation. For him it is confrontation. And between the two lies a fragile, dangerous truth that sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can say is nothing at all. As the silence deepens, something primal stirs within the man. He is pulled into the ancient currents of longing and loss, into the archetypal drama of pursuit and distance that has played out since the dawn of human desire. The absence of her voice awakens in him the hunter's instinct, the urge to chase what withdraws, to claim what evades. Yet, paradoxically, the more he reaches for her, the more intangible she becomes. Her silence is like smoke. The harder his grip, the more it slips through his fingers. Carl Jung described this paradox as projection. A man casts his unacknowledged desires, fears, and unmet needs upon the woman before him. When she is silent, his projections multiply, unchecked by her clarifications or reassurances. He begins to see not her, but his own fantasies, his own wounds, his own unhealed story reflected back. To the untrained psyche, this is unbearable. He believes he is suffering because of her, but in truth, he suffers because of himself. Her silence simply unmasks what was always within. You may notice this yourself. When you stop speaking, when you retreat into stillness, he becomes restless. He circles around you, demanding explanations, demanding a narrative he can control. He craves your words because your words soothe his ego, keep him grounded in the illusion that he understands you. But when you say nothing, you remind him of a truth men fear most. He does not truly know you and perhaps never has. Silence reclaims the mystery of the feminine. and mystery is something the masculine ego cannot dominate. In that mystery, obsession takes root. He replays your silence in his mind as though it were a puzzle. He wonders if you are angry, if you are indifferent, if you are testing him. He wonders if another man now holds your attention. His pride tells him he should not care, yet his spirit betrays him. The silence grows larger than life, filling his days, haunting his nights. It is not you he cannot escape. It is the endless echo of what you no longer say. And yet, silence does not simply torment. It purifies. For the woman, silence is often chosen not out of malice but out of necessity. There comes a moment when words become wasted breath, when explanations fall like stones into the bottomless pit of misunderstanding. In that moment, she chooses silence as an act of preservation. She is not withdrawing love, she is conserving energy. She is not punishing, she is protecting her own soul. Silence becomes her sanctuary, the sacred space where she can hear her own heart again. The Stoics spoke of detachment, of learning to separate the self from what cannot be controlled. Seneca wrote that true peace comes not from possessing others, but from mastering oneself. A woman's silence is an embodiment of this wisdom. By choosing not to engage, she refuses to be ruled by reaction. She refuses to waste her essence in proving what should already be seen. Her quiet is not empty. It is filled with power, with boundaries, with the silent reminder that her worth does not depend on convincing anyone to recognize it. For the man, however, the silence grows unbearable, because it strips him of distraction. Without her voice to soothe his ego, he hears the hollow echo of his own soul. He realizes how much of his strength was built upon her presence, her patience, her endless giving. Without it, he is left with himself, and often that self feels frighteningly incomplete. Jung called this confrontation with the self the most difficult of all tasks. The silence is not her weapon, it is his mirror, and what he sees within it terrifies him. This is why some men return again and again to the woman they once abandoned. They tell themselves it is her beauty, her charm, her presence that pulls them back. But beneath the surface lies the truth. They are drawn to the silence she once gave them, the silence that forced them into their own depths. They are haunted not by her words, but by the absence of them, by the unspoken lessons she left behind. In losing her voice, they began to hear their own. You, as a woman, must understand this. Your silence is not weakness. It is the language of power, the rhythm of the moon, the strength of the tide. It is the reminder that your energy is sacred and that not every conflict deserves the gift of your words. Men may fear it, resist it, or obsess over it, but they cannot deny its impact. Silence, when chosen with intention, is a force that reshapes relationships and redefines respect. And so the man thinks, endlessly, of what you mean by your silence. He wonders if he has lost you, if he has failed you, if he has become invisible. He imagines you in rooms he cannot enter, in futures he cannot control. Your silence becomes his lesson, his torment, his shadow. And whether he breaks under it, or grows beyond it, depends on whether he dares to face himself in the mirror you have quietly placed before him. Over time, the silence begins to acquire a life of its own. It no longer feels like the absence of words, but like a presence that lingers in the room even when she is gone. He finds himself glancing at the door, half expecting her to appear, to break the stillness with some sign of recognition. But nothing comes, and in that void, his mind creates its own phantoms, visions of her walking away, of her laughter shared with another, of her serenity untouched by his turmoil. Carl Jung wrote that when we are deprived of external distractions, the unconscious rises to the surface. For the man, this means that her silence does not stay outside of him. It enters him, awakening hidden patterns of abandonment and desire. It becomes a theater in which his unhealed wounds take center stage. He may project anger, accusing her of cruelty. He may project longing, convincing himself that her quiet is a sign of secret love. Or he may fall into despair, interpreting her stillness as proof of his unworthiness. The silence itself does nothing. It is neutral. What destroys or transforms him is the meaning he attaches to it. And here lies the irony. The more he fights her silence, the louder it grows. He sends messages into the void, hoping for a reply. He rehearses conversations in his head, imagining how he would win her back if she would only listen. He tells himself stories to soothe the ache, yet every story eventually collapses under the weight of reality. No answer comes, no explanation arrives. He is left alone with his mind, and his mind is not kind. You, the woman, may watch this unfold and wonder at his confusion. You may think, did my silence truly matter that much? Yes, it matters because it interrupts the pattern. Men are trained to believe that conflict will be followed by resolution, that women will explain, argue, forgive, or at least react. Silence removes this rhythm. It offers nothing, no foothold, no predictable script. And when the script is broken, he is forced to face what cannot be negotiated, the reality of his own limitations. Some men cannot bear this. They rage, they insult, they chase, they try to provoke a response. Their anger is not strength, it is weakness disguised as dominance. It is the child within them pounding on the door of attention, unwilling to be ignored. Others collapse into desperation, begging for words, for anything that will fill the aching void. These men reveal not their cruelty, but their dependency. They cannot exist without her voice to anchor their fragile identity. But there are rare men who approach silence differently. For them, silence becomes a mirror of discipline. They begin to see that the storm inside them is not her doing, but their own. They recognize that their agitation is the product of an ego unaccustomed to stillness. These men may sit with the discomfort, allow the silence to carve open their defenses, and in that carving, they discover something unexpected: peace. They begin to see that her silence was never meant to destroy them. It was meant to show them what they lacked. In this way, silence becomes both punishment and invitation. It punishes the ego, which thrives on control and reaction. But it invites the soul to awaken, to step into a deeper awareness of self. It says, if you want to know her, first know yourself. If you want to understand her silence, confront the noise within your own heart. For the woman, silence is sacred. It is not simply withdrawal. It is a boundary, a reclamation of energy too often wasted on proving worth to those who refuse to see it. Silence is the pause between chapters, the breath before renewal, the proof that her life continues even when she does not speak. It is the reminder that she is whole unto herself. Men may interpret it as cruelty, but the truth is far more powerful. Silence is compassion turned inward. It is the act of refusing to betray oneself by pouring words into ears unwilling to listen. It is not about him, It is about her choosing herself. And so, in the stillness, he thinks. He thinks of what was lost, of what cannot be regained. He thinks of the woman whose voice once filled his world and whose silence now defines it. He thinks of the shadows she awakened, the wounds she revealed, the ego she unsettled. And whether he becomes bitter or enlightened depends on whether he has the courage to see that the silence was never against him. It was for her. Yet even then, her silence has done its work. For once touched by it, a man is never the same again. He may forget her face, her words, her touch, but he will not forget the weight of her quiet. It will echo within him long after she has walked away, reminding him of the truth he once resisted. That silence, chosen with dignity, is more powerful than any voice raised in desperation. The silence does not fade. It evolves. What began as a withdrawal of words becomes a presence that shapes his every thought. It follows him into crowded rooms, sits with him in moments of triumph, and haunts him in the quiet before sleep. The more he tries to dismiss it, the more it lingers. For silence is not emptiness. It is memory crystallized, emotion unspoken, truth withheld. And truth, even unspoken, has a way of demanding recognition. Jung observed that the unconscious speaks in symbols, not in language. To the man, her silence becomes a symbol far greater than any conversation could achieve. It is the embodiment of the feminine mystery, the reminder that she is not fully knowable, not fully containable, not endlessly available. He begins to see her not as an object of his desire, but as a force, untamed and sovereign. The silence that unsettles him also awakens reverence, for in the absence of her words he realizes she belongs first to herself. Yet reverence is not the first emotion he feels. First comes fear. Fear that he has lost her forever. Fear that her silence means she has transcended him, that she has found a world where he no longer matters. Fear that he has been replaced by another. These fears reveal what the ego has always tried to deny, that love cannot be commanded, that connection cannot be owned. Silence strips away the illusion of possession, leaving him to face the raw truth that she is free. Some men collapse under this realization. They grow bitter, resentful, and defensive. They tell themselves she is cold, heartless, manipulative. They project blame to avoid the pain of looking inward. But those who are willing to endure the discomfort discover something deeper. They begin to see that her silence was never an attack, but an unveiling. It showed him his dependence, his insecurity, his need to control. And if he dares to face this, he begins the slow journey toward individuation, the becoming of a self that no longer seeks wholeness outside but within. You, the woman, hold in your silence a mirror he cannot escape. It is the silence that reveals his addictions to your attention, your softness, your constant giving. It is the silence that reveals whether his love was rooted in respect or merely in need. And it is the silence that teaches him the truth. No, man wishes to face that feminine energy once withdrawn cannot be forced to return. It chooses freely, or it does not choose at all. The Stoics would nod in agreement. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that nothing external belongs to us, not even the affection of those we hold closest. To expect permanence is to invite despair. And so, when faced with silence, the wise man does not demand its end. He accepts it as part of the order of things, as a lesson he is privileged to endure. Through this acceptance, he finds strength, because he no longer seeks to control what was never his to control. But not all men are stoic. Many will circle endlessly in regret. They will remember the moments they failed to listen, the times they dismissed her truth, the days they took her presence for granted. Regret is a heavy companion, and silence gives it space to grow. The mind replays what cannot be changed, punishing itself with images of what might have been. And still she remains silent, untouched by his spirals, because silence is her liberation, not his punishment. For the woman, silence is not a weapon, but a sanctuary. It is the choice to step away from noise, to step into clarity. It is where she gathers her strength, where she remembers that she was whole long before he arrived. In silence, she hears her own soul again, the voice drowned out by endless justifications, the wisdom obscured by constant giving. Silence restores her, renews her, reminds her that her worth is not dependent on how much she can endure for another, and so he thinks endlessly. He thinks of her in the quiet of dawn, when the world is still half asleep. He thinks of her in the late hours, when shadows stretch across the walls. He thinks of her not in words, but in absence. Her silence becomes the rhythm of his days, the haunting of his nights. And whether this leads him to ruin or to rebirth depends on whether he learns the lesson hidden within, that the silence of a woman is not an end, but an initiation. It is an initiation into maturity, into humility, into the acceptance that love cannot be seized, it can only be honored. It is an initiation into the realization that the feminine is not a possession, but a mystery, and that the deepest respect a man can give is to allow that mystery to remain untamed. In silence, she teaches without speaking, and in that teaching, he either awakens or he is left behind. At first he mistakes her silence for a pause, a temporary retreat, something that will end when she has forgiven, when she has softened, when she has remembered him. But as days stretch into weeks, he realizes her silence is not absence. It is transformation. It is not directed at him alone. It is for her, a reordering of her world where his presence is no longer the axis. This realization unsettles him more than anger ever could. Anger is an energy he can respond to, argue with, fight against. Silence, however, is immovable. It offers no openings, no cracks, no foothold. It forces him to sit with himself, to hear the thoughts he has avoided, to face the hollowness inside that her presence once covered. Carl Jung wrote that what we reject in others is often what we fear within ourselves. Her silence becomes the mirror of his own avoidance. He remembers the times he silenced her voice by not listening, silenced her truth by dismissing it, silenced her needs by placing his above hers. Now, she does not need to raise her voice in protest. Her silence is the echo of all the words left unheard. For the man unprepared to face himself, this silence becomes unbearable. He seeks distraction in work, in friends, in fleeting pleasures. But nothing soothes the ache. The silence follows him everywhere, a shadow clinging to his thoughts. And when the night is quietest, he admits what he cannot say aloud, that he misses not just her presence, but the part of himself he only knew in her presence. But for the man willing to endure the fire, silence becomes a forge. He learns that his worth is not determined by her response, that his identity cannot rest on her reflection of him. Slowly, painfully, he begins to see himself not as half a soul in search of completion, but as a whole being capable of love without possession. This is the beginning of individuation, when desire transforms into devotion, when longing becomes reverence. Meanwhile, her silence deepens her power. It is not a void, but a boundary, a declaration that she is no longer available to be consumed. In silence, she rediscovers her autonomy. She is no longer defined by the giving of herself, but by the choosing of herself. And this shift is what terrifies him most, that she may never return, not because she is cruel, but because she has found freedom too precious to surrender again. The Stoics would remind him, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." He cannot force her silence to end, but he can choose how to meet it. To rage against it is to remain a slave to need. To accept it is to step into strength. And if he can learn this, he may come to see her silence not as punishment, but as the gift that forced him to grow. For now, though, he waits. He replays old conversations, searching for meaning in what was said and unsaid. He wonders if her silence is final, or if it holds within it the possibility of rebirth. And every passing day, the mystery of her silence shapes him more than her words ever could. Her silence is the book he cannot stop reading, the story without an ending, the question without an answer. And so, he thinks, always he thinks. In time, he begins to notice something strange. Her silence no longer belongs solely to him. It is not just a withdrawal from him, but a reorientation toward life itself. She is not sitting in the shadows, waiting for him to repent. She is walking forward, learning to move in rhythm with her own heartbeat, rediscovering the sacred music of her own existence. This unsettles him in ways he cannot name, for it means her silence is not a pause, it is an evolution. Jung spoke often of the anima, the feminine within the male psyche, the image that guides him toward wholeness. When she goes silent, that anima withdraws from projection. She ceases to be the fantasy he cast upon her, the screen for his unconscious needs. Her silence breaks the spell. He must now meet the feminine not as an external possession, but as an internal guide. Few men survive this passage without resistance. Fewer still welcome it. For him, it feels like exile from paradise. He remembers the sound of her laughter, the way her presence filled the empty spaces of his days, the warmth of knowing someone bore witness to his existence. Without it, he confronts what so many men fear most, the terror of insignificance. Who is he if she does not look at him? What value does his voice carry if hers does not answer? Her silence forces him into a desert of selfhood where echoes are his only companions. But within this desert, something begins to stir. He remembers the words of Marcus Aurelius. "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." If he clings to the need for her validation, he will perish in thirst. But if he accepts the silence as a teacher, he may discover water hidden beneath the sand. He may learn to sustain himself. This is the paradox of her silence. It feels like abandonment, yet it holds the potential for initiation. It strips him of comfort so that he may discover truth. It tears away illusion so that he may encounter reality. For the first time, he sees her not as an extension of his desires, but as a sovereign being with her own depths, her own mysteries, her own sacred boundaries. And if he dares to see clearly, he realizes something even more unsettling. Her silence is not empty. It is full of choices she can make without him, full of new beginnings he may never be part of, full of power that no longer bends toward his needs. In that fullness, she is radiant. In that fullness, she is untouchable. He wrestles with regret. He replays the moments he could have listened but did not, the apologies he could have spoken but withheld, the affection he could have offered but delayed. Regret is a cruel companion. It whispers that time cannot be reversed. Yet even regret has its function. It burns away arrogance. It softens the ego. It humbles the spirit. As he sits with the silence, he begins to see himself more clearly. He is not a god entitled to worship. He is not a savior destined to rescue. He is a man, flawed and finite, capable of wounding and of healing. And in this recognition, he encounters the possibility of something greater than possession. Respect. Respect for her choice. Respect for her strength. Respect for the silence that refuses to be broken on his terms. It dawns on him that love without respect is only hunger, and hunger devours. But respect nourishes. Respect allows him to hold space without demand, to witness without intrusion, to care without control. Still, he wonders what she thinks in her silence. Does she remember him with tenderness, or has she already placed him among the shadows of her past? Does she imagine his face as she moves through her days? Or has she erased him so fully that even his absence no longer echoes? The mystery gnaws at him, for silence reveals nothing and suggests everything. And so he thinks. Always he thinks. For her silence has not ended the story. It has only shifted its center. The narrative no longer belongs to him. It belongs to her. Her silence, once unbearable, eventually reveals its true nature. It was never meant as punishment, nor as weapon. It was a threshold. For the woman who embraces silence does not seek revenge, she seeks return. Return to her essence, to her dignity, to the quiet flame of selfhood that cannot be extinguished by neglect or misunderstanding. For the man, the reckoning lies not in breaking her silence, but in hearing what it says. Silence says, I will not be reduced to echoes of your need. Silence says, I will not barter my peace for the fragments of your attention. Silence says, I am no longer available for games that shrink my soul. Jung understood that individuation, the journey toward wholeness, requires confrontation with shadow. And for many men, her silence becomes the shadow he cannot escape. It exposes his dependence, his projections, his unfinished work. It reveals the boy who craves mothering, the ego that demands validation, the hunger that confuses possession with intimacy. In that revelation lies his chance for growth, but only if he dares to face it. The Stoics remind him, suffering is not in the event, but in the judgment. If he interprets her silence as cruelty, he remains shackled to bitterness. If he sees it as clarity, he begins to walk free. The silence offers him the same gift it offered her, the chance to detach from illusion. And for her, the silence is liberation. It is the reclamation of her time, her energy, her inner world. She no longer dances to the rhythm of his moods. She no longer bends herself into shapes to be chosen. She no longer waits for him to recognize what she already knows. In the quiet, she discovers her own voice, not the one he silenced, but the one she once silenced within herself. What does a man think when a woman goes silent? He thinks of loss, of longing, of questions without answers. He thinks of doors closing and roads diverging. He thinks of her power, though he may never admit it. And eventually, if he is wise, he thinks of himself, not in the mirror of her gaze, but in the solitude of his own becoming. For silence strips away the masks, and in that stripping, truth is revealed. And what of the woman? She has learned that silence is not weakness but strength, not retreat but rebirth, not the absence of words but the presence of wisdom. She walks forward with calm steps, no longer driven by the need to be understood, but by the clarity of knowing herself. The man may follow, or he may not. He may awaken, or he may remain in longing. It is no longer her concern, for she has chosen a higher path, one where her worth is not measured by his recognition, but by her own. And so the final truth resounds, clear as a bell struck in an empty hall.